All right, so keeping with time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Terrence McTeer, Director of the Prison Education Project here at Washington University in St. Louis. So excited to be kicking off this Maggie Garb Lecture Series this year. Today with our guest, Dr. Christopher Beasley. I'm going to read his brief bio, and then we'll go ahead and kick things off with him giving his talk. Please keep in mind that this talk is 30 minutes and it is designed to be recorded and sent in to our students who are on the inside. So this is really a series for our students, and we're so excited to be having this opportunity today. So quickly, Dr. Beasley is an assistant professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma, where he studies transitions from prison to college, leads the development of the Husky Post-Prison Pathways Initiative, and advises the Formerly Incarcerated Student Association. His scholarly work emphasizes the possibilities incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people imagine for themselves, influences on these possibilities, and how they alter life courses. Dr. Beasley has also spoken extensively about the role of people with lived expertise in the creation of social change and ways to realize this potential. He's invested in this scholarship because of his own transition from prisoner to social change agent and scholar. Dr. Beasley attended community college after leaving prison and cut his social justice chops fighting for queer liberation as an undergraduate student in the early 2000s. He began organizing and supporting formerly incarcerated college students as a graduate student in 2010 and co-founded the Formerly Incarcerated College Graduate Network in 2014, an organization that now has over 1,000 members across 44 states and 10 countries. In addition to his scholarship, Dr. Beasley currently focuses on investing in student leaders while also creating systems and structures in which they can realize their potential. He also serves as board director for both the Formerly Incarcerated College Graduates Network and From Prison Cells to PhD. Please help me welcome Dr. Christopher Beasley.
Thank you. Appreciate that warm welcome, Dr. McTeer. I won't spend too much time on my bio here in a little bit, but I'll recap some of that. First, before I get started, though, I wanted to sort of acknowledge some of the shoulders that I stand on and beside, including John Irwin, Eddie Ellis, Vivian Nixon, Danny Murillo, others at Bedford Hills, and others that have really created a foundation for education inside, education after prison, and leadership by those who are most directly impacted by mass criminalization. Also wanted to thank Washington University in St. Louis, and co-founded by Maggie Garb, as well for creating this space and for selecting Dr. McTeer to lead your efforts. I think that his presence here is the value of his presence here is demonstrated by the lineup of speakers that we have for this lecture series, and I'm really honored to be among them. So as Dr. McTeer mentioned, I'm assistant professor, principal investigator for a research lab, lead developer for a Husky Post-Prison Pathways Initiative. I'm also a founding faculty advisor and current faculty advisor for the Formerly Incarcerated Student Association of University of Washington, Tacoma, co-founder and board director for the Formerly Incarcerated College Graduates Network, and board director for From Prison Cells to PhD. I'm dedicated to this work because of my own experience in transitioning from prison to college. And one thing that really stuck out to me in grad school was how it had taken me 7 years of college to realize that it was even possible for me to become a professor, let alone start along that pathway. So I've really set it as one of my life's missions to better understand and expand possibilities of formerly incarcerated people and incarcerated people. Also while fostering third order change through leadership. And I'll talk a little bit more about what third order change is, but I want to sort of introduce that term now and kind of bookmark that term of third order change. And we'll come back to that in a moment. When I look at my early life, it was one of constrained self, if you will. So I grew up poor and gay in rural Southern Illinois. Didn't really see a lot of possibilities for myself other than maybe factory life was probably the best future that I saw for myself. And little sense of where and how I could find purpose in the community and self-respect. I found those things through deviance and drug culture, though. and suffered some of the consequences of that with repeated incarcerations, culminating in some concurrent prison sentences. And when I got out, I was fortunate to have an uncle that introduced the possibility of education as an alternative way of getting some of those same things that I was able to get through the drug community. Again, it took me 7 years, and I finally realized I could become a professor, and now hope to understand and foster possibility for others. I also when I look back, there was not only constrained possibilities or constrained self, but also constrained impact. I felt like I had little agency or sort of ability to make a difference and have influence on others and on my community. Instead, I was seen and treated as a stain on society because of my poverty, my gayness, my addiction, my criminal behavior. But it was something that to be sort of minimized and reduced in society, that I as a person was someone to be protected from, or to be changed, to be solved, to be fixed, if you will. So rather than seeing the knowledges from my experiences as something valuable that could contribute to society, there was more of an attempt to diminish those experiences, to diminish me as a person. As an undergraduate student, though, I was invited to join a chemical health advisory committee. My past was seen as an asset, as a source of expertise that others on the committee didn't have. I was able to identify more current substances of use that students, substances students might be using, why they might be using it, and how we can sort of reduce harmful use in a way that doesn't harm the individuals themselves. As a graduate student, I started studying homonegativity and addiction recovery, and introduced I say new because they're really not new concepts, but new concepts to the research world, like the idea of hope and recidivism. Those of us who have been on the other side of the bars probably think, well, it might be obvious that people who are more hopeful for a different life when they get out might be more likely to lead a different life and maybe not go back to prison. But at the time, only 3 other researchers had actually studied the role of hope and recidivism, and none had actually looked at actual recidivism, rather whether people actually went back to prison. I found that not only was it important, but that it had a very large effect size. So it was strongly important, the likelihood of going back to prison. It didn't even matter if you knew how to get there, just the hope that life could be different is what really made the change there. As an early career person, I started to become seen as a post-prison higher education expert, developing novel communities, communities that didn't exist before, but communities that I wanted to exist. And so I organized them. Also developing novel scholarship, if you will, around post-prison higher education. When I started studying post-prison higher education, fewer than 10 people had ever studied the transition from prison to college empirically. The question is like why? People hadn't necessarily had that experience themselves, and when they were thinking of research questions as researchers, they hadn't been exposed to that information, so they didn't even think to ask the question about going to prison after college, right? So it's important to know that different people, when they come to the table with different experiences, it leads to different questions, different solutions, etc. That's something that I started to see as I became more of an expert in post-prison higher education. And now I'm developing theories to set a foundation for prison and post-prison higher education, as well as social change. And if you look at the scholarship on prison and post-prison education, it really doesn't include those mechanisms of why. And I would argue because incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people haven't been centered in that scholarship. And so that'll come up again as we think about third order change here. But just to sort of key in on the idea that when you bring in people with lived experience from different perspectives, you get different questions, you get different solutions. So why do we need maybe different people, different perspectives, offering different solutions? Well, we live in a system in which there are major and inadequately addressed social problems like crime and public safety, the idea of mass incarceration that we're trying to address crime and public safety through mass incarceration. We realize as a society that there are a lot of people locked up, and we're trying to figure out different ways to address crime and public safety. We also see challenges with reentry and recidivism. And a lot of people who get out of prison go back to prison. Not everyone, certainly, but a lot of people do. We also see intersectional problems as well, like poverty, racism, homophobia, mental illness, foster care transitions. And all of these social issues intersect with the criminalization system, in that people from minoritized ethnic backgrounds, people in poverty, gay and lesbian people, people with mental illness, people who've been in the foster care system are more likely to be in prison, right? We see an overrepresentation of people from those backgrounds in prison, right? So there's not only an expertise around criminal behavior and life in the criminalization system and reentry, but there's also expertise around these other related social issues. So I want to talk a little bit about why our expertise might be valuable. There are different ways of looking at ways in which we address social problems and solutions. And they're called like paradigms. They're sort of like a lens and looking at things. If anyone on the other side is familiar with schemas, these are kind of like schemas, right? They are mental frameworks through which we understand the world, and therefore mental frameworks through which we understand problems, the causes of problems, and the solutions to problems. So one type of paradigm, or one way of looking at paradigms is through like first order change, or sort of a first order examination of problems and solutions. And that's where we look at a problem through its existing paradigms, its existing ideas of problems, their causes and their mechanisms, right? So we kind of use the lens that has always been used, or that has recently been used at least, for looking at that problem. And when we use that existing lens, we develop solutions that are pretty much grounded in what we knew before. And so they kind of result in incrementally different solutions, right? So maybe a new solution, but it's pretty heavily related, pretty strongly related to the past solutions. And those paradigms, those ways of looking at the world are useful for efficient decision-making, but they can also lead to ineffective solutions. So they're not quite working out the way we'd hope they would work, such as with those problems that we mentioned earlier. So we've kind of solved or addressed the issue in some ways, but it's still a problem in many other ways. And we rely on contributions by what we call like dominant actors, or the people and organizations that have kind of always been leading the efforts, at the exclusion of others that maybe might have important insights but haven't been at the table, if you will. So that's the idea of first order change. It's sort of looking at a problem through the existing lens, and therefore developing solutions using the solutions similar to the existing ones. An example of first order change, if we maybe look at crime, might be that people are bad and do bad things, right? It's sort of a mental framework through which people might understand the world. If we use that existing lens, we might say people cannot control their behavior and need to be controlled. Therefore, well, that's sort of the lens, right? People cannot control their behavior and need to be controlled. Therefore, people must be controlled. Therefore, we need greater enforcement and greater enforcers, right? So if we say like that crime is still a problem, look at it through the existing lens, we'd say, oh, we need more of what we know solves that problem: enforcement and enforcers. So it's kind of like working with what you know. It's change that relies on existing paradigms. First order change is some of the advantages of first order change is that, one, it's simple and familiar. So it's simple because it's the idea that we've always relied on, right? And so we have developed a lot of different ways of understanding it. It's very familiar to us. It often works, at least somewhat, otherwise we wouldn't have developed it, right? So in some ways it works. And it's often efficient because we have a lot of existing structural supports built around that way of looking at the world. The disadvantages are that it's usually centered on deficits and problems. It can often lead, it's often reactionary, addressing sort of immediate problems right in front of us, can lead to incremental adjustments over time, small changes over time, But an important disadvantage is that it can create problems in other parts of the system, such as whenever you use enforcement and you start to lock up a lot of people as your solution to crime, then you have communities and people that are affected by it, right? Just an example there. Another way of looking at change is second order change. And so this is introducing a new understanding, alternative paradigms or alternative understandings, alternative lenses, frameworks for looking at the world. So here you might have different ideas about problems, their causes, the mechanisms or ways in which the problems lead to different outcomes. And that can then promote different solutions. An example of that is an example of a second order change. A different way of looking at crime might be that people are good and do good unless bad things happen to those people. So here you might say that people are predisposed to be good and do good, but maldevelopment or things that go wrong in someone's development leads to antisocial behavior. Therefore, intervention early on can ensure healthy development and prevent crime by making sure that maldevelopment doesn't happen and people therefore don't go on to engage in antisocial behavior, if you will. So thus reducing crime. So a different lens that leads to different solutions, if you will. So we can introduce second order change here. That's what we've sort of seen in the field of sort of crime and how we sort of address that in different ways. So the advantage of second order change is that it alters systems and structures that can cause problems. So we can sort of really start to peel away different layers of the onion and look at a problem in new ways, start to alter those systems that might be causing the problem, alter systems that are exacerbating the problem by trying to solve it. It offers opportunities for comprehensive and longer term solutions and creativity, innovation, et cetera, by looking at the problem in new ways and offering different solutions. And it can reduce stigma about people that are not functioning well in the system, right? So they're no longer sort of necessarily bad people predisposed to do bad, but maybe they were bad people and they were good people in bad situations and sort of turned out that way, right? So we can look at people in different ways sometimes by introducing second order change. But second order change also has disadvantages to it. It often conflicts with existing paradigms or ways of looking at the world. So we have this new change coming in. It may conflict with the old way. And so that can cause a conflict, particularly between like different people and organizations that were benefiting from old systems. They may be reluctant to adopt new systems and they may lose power in that process. It can weaken autonomy and disempower communities when it's imposed by others. So sometimes you have experts coming into communities and they say, no, you're looking at it all wrong. Here's how you should be looking at it, right? So we've seen that historically with second order change. Oftentimes the academics come in or like an agency comes in that's leaning on academic work. So as an academic, I realize the value of that, but I also realize some of the ways it can harm communities too. And it may take time to develop new research and new systems to implement these ideas of second order change. The new way of looking at things may lead to new solutions that can cause other problems elsewhere in the system, right? And so it can be sometimes like whack-a-mole. Like you sort of, you solve a problem in a new way. Oh, we didn't realize it was going to create this problem over here. Solve a problem in a different way. Oh, we have this problem over here, right? So you can have problems created in other parts of the system when you bring in a new idea. And just like with first order change, with those paradigms before, how they were entrenched paradigms, these new paradigms can be entrenched as well. That entrenchment of paradigms happens because people are trained in existing paradigms, right? They read textbooks from the old paradigms, the old way of looking at things. They're taught by people in the old paradigms, the old way of looking at things, and they develop these mental frameworks, frameworks for understanding the world and operating in the world. Same thing can happen with second order change, right? We've said, okay, you're doing it wrong. Here's the right way of looking at it. We develop textbooks, we develop teachers, they go on to train new people, and now that new way of looking at the world becomes the way of looking at the world. And as I mentioned earlier, it may be causing other problems in the system or may not be adequately addressing the problem. So it can have, that can definitely be a disadvantage to second order change. Third order change is another type of change that's talked about in the same literature in which first order change and second order change were introduced, but it's less sort of discussed in the scholarly world, and certainly less in the practical world, the professional world. And I think part of the reason is the way in which the authors frame it as people in organizations being freed from the constraints of paradigms, right? Not operating from any type of mental framework, if you will, based on, so it's classically understood as freedom from paradigms. I think part of the reason it isn't discussed and implemented very well is that, people in organizations, just if you look at them fundamentally, we tend to run off what we call like schemas or mental frameworks of understanding the world, right? It's how our brains tend to operate. So the idea of operating from a schema, I don't know, I haven't seen evidence really in the writing that is possible for organizations. And I guess I would question that. I would want to see the evidence. But an example maybe to operationalize that a little bit, and I'll operationalize it a little bit more here in a moment, is we can do it with an example. People and situations are complex. Causes of crime are multifaceted and vary with context. Solutions need to take into account those various different situations. Those situations change over time. And so if we look at crime through that lens of being multifaceted and having a lot of different causes, et cetera, and those causes changing over time, then it suggests that we need to better understand and assess various different situations. And importantly, our understanding and assessment need to change over time, right? The way I look at it is sort of like fluid and adaptable. The advantages of this slide should say third order change, apologies on that, but the advantages of third order change are similar to second order change, and that third order change is flexible, it's adaptable, or it's innovative. It's also more flexible, adaptable, and continually innovative, right? So the idea with third order change is that if you're operating free from paradigm, or I would argue have flexible and adaptable paradigms, then you can have sort of new ways of looking at things over time, right? New ideas can emerge, be implemented, try it out. You can sort of continually look to see if it's working or not, allow new ideas to emerge and come to the surface, et cetera. And it can also provide greater autonomy and empowerment if done correctly. And I'll talk a little bit more about the operationalization here in a moment. It's more sustainable and future oriented. So we're always sort of like continually innovating with third order change. It can be slow and inefficient, just like second order change, because you don't have existing systems and structures to support it. There can be cognitive dissonance when people's ideas are continually challenged, right? Are you looking at things in the right way? Oh no, here's another way of looking at it, right? So that continual re-examination of the fundamental ways in which we look at problems can cause cognitive dissonance or a psychological discomfort whenever our ideas conflict with one another or our ideas conflict with our behavior. Also, existing stakeholders can be uncomfortable with that dissonance, that psychological discomfort, and their loss of power, just like they did with second order change, but probably to even to more extent with third order change. It might be less attractive to funders because you can't present them with a clear theory of change necessarily, like here is the way that the problem is created, here's the way that the problem is solved, therefore we're solving it in that way. Third order change is kind of like, we'll kind of see as time goes on. Here's some different ways we think the problem might be caused and how it might be solved, but we'll see as we go, kind of thing with third order change. I operationalize third order change as systems that are flexible and adaptable. We incubate new ideas, we support their development, and there are opportunities for those new ideas to be adopted. So it's being free from paradigm, if you will, through the emergence, the flexibility and emergence of new ideas. And so I think of the starting point is differences in perspectives and experiences, incubating those new ideas, supporting their development, having opportunities for adoption over time. And another thing is diffusing those experiences to others so that they can learn from those new ideas being generated. And I think there's a particular opportunity for formerly incarcerated people to be centered in this third order change. As I mentioned earlier, we have different experiences. Our understanding of the criminalization system of crime and behavior and why it occurs, et cetera, is not grounded in textbooks, right? It's not grounded in past paradigms. Ours is grounded in our real world experiences. So the things that we see happening now are our experiences with that. And also, as I mentioned, we have experience with a multitude of other social problems that intersect with the criminalization system. So we have these perspectives that are less paradigm laden and more grounded in our lived expertise. And also importantly, it's important to remember that people who engage in deviant behavior, right, behavior that is outside of the norm or outside of the law, research has shown that there's greater divergent thinking among those people, right? We engage in different behavior because we think sometimes a little bit differently, a little bit outside of the box. We solve our problems in ways that are a little bit outside of the box, sometimes illegal. But it's important to remember that we have that as a strength as incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. And that's going to be important as we think about different ways to solve problems in our society. We need that divergent thinking that leads to divergent creativity, which leads to innovation. And I can't get in this talk. I don't have time to really go into detail about how third order change can be fostered among formerly incarcerated people, but I have talked about this in more detail, and I'm writing some things up on this. Happy to communicate one-on-one with anyone that wants to learn more about this, and happy to do other talks and write more on this. But I look at third order change as a process that involves critical consciousness, capacity building, psychological empowerment, social empowerment, and reflexivity. Critical consciousness is where you become aware of the systems you're embedded in and how you interact with those systems, how those systems affect you, how you affect those systems, et cetera, right? But it's this awareness, this consciousness of the world, how you interact with the world and its systems and how they impact you, how you impact them, et cetera, right? So I think if third order change with formerly incarcerated people starts with this critical consciousness building, developing that awareness, and then building capacity. It's what we call capacity building, but building the knowledge, skills, abilities to act on those things that you might see wrong in the systems, et cetera. Another is psychological empowerment. So developing the mental empowerment or the mental confidence or ability, the mental certainty that you can actually act with that capacity to change those things that you see wrong, right? So that's psychological empowerment. I believe I have the power to change, if you will. Social empowerment is the changing of social structures, systems around people, so that their agency can be enacted on, right? And so you might have the psychological confidence and belief that you can go out and create change, but the systems and structures around you might constrain that. So it's important to work on both pieces with formerly incarcerated people, psychological empowerment and social empowerment that allows their ideas to come to the table, those new and innovative ideas to come to the table, the ideas that are continuously grounded in current experiences, not the experiences of people 30 years ago. And then I think important in third order change also is our processes that encourage reflexivity, or sort of always looking back at what we're doing. What kind of impact are we having? Are there other ways of looking at things, et cetera? But it's sort of always reflecting, particularly on your actions and changing your actions in relationship to the needs that you might see as you reflect on things. So just to conclude things with this talk today, and again, I'm happy to follow up with people one-on-one for more details, but I believe that there's potential for fostering third order change and addressing major social problems by supporting formerly incarcerated people particularly through paradigm disruption that formerly incarcerated people can and that so I think there's potential for formerly incarcerated scholars and practitioners to introduce change to the world. That's particularly possible whenever we encourage critical consciousness, capacity building, psychological empowerment, social empowerment, and reflexivity, and that that we can initiate this change through self-transformation. So I don't believe that we're taking questions today, but I did want to let people know if they have questions, they can follow up with me. I have my email address and social media there. I also have the organizations that I'm connected to and their social media. So feel free to follow me or on social media or reach out with questions through email or social media. Thank you.